Can the Afghan army defeat the Taliban? The armed group has made huge gains in the southeastern city of Ghazni. That's about 150 kilometers from the capital, Kabul. So how much of a threat is it to the government? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The people of Afghanistan have not known peace for a long time. In the 1980s, it was the conflict to end the Soviet occupation. In the 1990s, they had to contend with the brutal rule of the Taliban. That ended with the 2001 U.S. invasion following the 9/11 attacks. But the Taliban never really went away. And its recent raid on the southeastern city of Ghazni is a sign of how much of a threat the armed group still poses. At least 400 people have been killed, a quarter of them civilians. The Afghan military says it's making strategic gains with the help of U.S. airstrikes. We have a lot to discuss with our guests, but first, this report from Charlotte Bellis.
After 6 days of a Taliban siege on the Afghan city of Ghazni, residents emerge from their homes. They bring brooms and shovels and anger.
The government has not paid attention to the people here, and as you can see, most of the markets have burned down in the city.
Ghazni's population of 270,000 people found themselves in the middle of the war with the Taliban on Friday. They survived by sheltering in their homes, rationing food and water, without power or communications. In the aftermath, we're learning more about the human cost. Hundreds of people were killed, Taliban fighters, soldiers, police and civilians. Residents say some died in government airstrikes. Too dangerous to move, bodies littered the streets for days. The Red Cross moved some to a hospital. Inside, space and resources are rationed between hundreds of soldiers and civilians. The Red Cross ferried fuel, body bags and medicine to its doctors, despite a direct threat from the Taliban. The armed group's attack was the most aggressive against an Afghan city since it briefly took control of Kunduz 2 years ago. The city's police chief estimated more than 1,000 fighters swarmed into Ghazni after midnight on Friday. Equipped with guns and rocket launchers, their arsenal grew as they overran checkpoints and seized police vehicles. After 4 consecutive days of the government prematurely declaring victory over the Taliban, it sent reinforcements on Monday. The extra troops swung the battle. The Afghan military requesting just 2 US airstrikes on Tuesday compared to 32 in the days prior.
Afghan security forces strongly resisted and fought the Taliban with high morale in different parts of the city and defended their people and country. Due to heavy clashes, the enemy suffered a lot of casualties.
Ghazni is important. It lies just 150 kilometres from Kabul on the main motorway south. Take Ghazni and you sever Kabul from the southern provinces. The military pushed out the Taliban this time, but fighters remain in the surrounding villages. And in the middle, the people of Ghazni. Charlotte Bellis, Al Jazeera.
The Taliban was pushed out of power in 2001 after the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, but the armed group hasn't gone away. A report by the Special Inspector General for Reconstruction has found that as of January, 229 districts were under government control, which is about 56.3% of all districts. There were 59 areas, approximately 14.5%, under the control of the Taliban and other factions. The remaining 119 districts are contested, controlled by neither the Afghan government nor armed groups. All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us in Kabul, Shafiq Hamdam, chairman of the Afghan Anti-Corruption Network and a former advisor to NATO. In Washington, D.C., Ahmad Majidyar, resident fellow at the Middle East Institute, and also in Kabul, Mushtaq Rahim, a political analyst specializing in regional security. Welcome to all of you. Mushtaq, I want to start with you. What would it mean if Ghazni were to fall to the Taliban?
Well, I think it's a debacle, big loss for the government. Actually, it's a very clear failure of intelligence, because Taliban coming together in such large number, they certainly have gathered their resources from different provinces and even beyond borders of Afghanistan, beyond the Durand line. And throughout, they have been doing all this. I mean, they have been preparing for this attack for quite a while. People, the general public knew about it. But the fall of Ghazni is a big loss in a sense that, first of all, falling of a city that is merely outside Kabul, I mean 150 kilometers or even less than that. Secondly, a city that connects the center of the country to the whole of the southern region and even western region, and then maintaining their hold over the city for 4 days, or even right now we hear that some of the clearing operation has to be continued because Taliban are resisting the forces. So it's a big loss for the government, and I think it's a big setback for the security institution of Afghanistan.
Shafiq, aside from Ghazni, on Wednesday there were dozens of Afghan soldiers and police that were killed in a Taliban attack on a military outpost in northern Baghlan province. What does all this say about the overall strength of the Taliban right now?
I believe it's not only the Taliban, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, it's Pakistani military as well as Pakistani militias. I would call all these joint attacks as well as complex attacks. It's just coming ahead of actually a big ceasefire that we are expecting to happen in Big Eid or Eid al-Adha. So these are the moves by the Taliban as well, a small faction of Taliban as well as their affiliates such as Al-Qaeda and other factions to interrupt the peace process and negotiations as well as to create fear and insecurity. And meanwhile, it's coming ahead of almost 2 months ahead of the parliamentary elections. So it's more of interrupting the peace, stability, security, as well as negotiation with the Taliban, especially while it's almost 1 year from the President Trump strategy for Afghanistan and after a direct negotiation of America with the Taliban in Qatar and Doha. So these are the signs and signals that a faction of Taliban are clearly opposing peace and reconciliation.
Ahmad, if we're talking specifically about the violence right now and the repercussions of the violence, is all of this, what's happening right now, due more to the strength of the Taliban and or other groups, or is it due more to the weakness of the government in Afghanistan?
It's actually a combination of both, because lately the Taliban certainly has gotten the upper hand on the battlefield, and the fall of Ghazni, even if it was briefly, was a major blow to the Afghan government because it exposed the vulnerabilities and weaknesses of the Afghan security forces. It also undermines the confidence of the Afghan people in the government, because if they cannot secure a provincial center just 100 or 150 kilometers away from the capital, then how they can secure the rest of the country. But the Taliban also wanted to show project power and also show that the Trump administration's strategy aimed at weakening the Taliban on the battlefield and to force the insurgent to come to the negotiating table has not yielded results. And also by capturing a provincial capital and also increasing their military activities across the country, the Taliban also wants to maximize their battlefield gains in order to use that as leverage in any potential negotiations with the United States.
Mushtaq, I want to get back to a point you were making about the overall security in the country and ask you specifically about, if the Taliban were to be able to take Ghazni, does that raise the specter to you and your colleagues that the Taliban could potentially even surround Kabul? I mean, Ghazni is very close to Kabul, right?
Well, that might be a bit of over-exaggeration, because even for taking Ghazni, they had to invest so much of resources and they had to accumulate it from all around. And coming to Kabul and surrounding it, it will be a bit of over-exaggeration. But certainly they have challenged the government writ and they have challenged the government resources. And it's not only Ghazni, but we know that over the course of last 4 to 5 days, they have attacked one crossing point in Takhar, the Ay Khanum one point. They have attacked a post of the Afghan security forces in Faryab, where they have taken hostage a number of security forces. They have attacked in Baghlan, and they are trying to show their strength all around. But coming to the point, basically, I don't think they have as much resources to continuously challenge and continuously invest in such big attacks. But it's more to do with they every now and then make a big statement on the conflict scene of Afghanistan to just demonstrate their power, send a message across, and also they are trying to erode the confidence of general public in the Afghan government. So this is more to do with a tactical thing, not in regard to taking the geography, because they are not able to maintain it even in remote areas. So it's more of a change of tactic for Taliban, which has been working for them since the collapse of Kunduz 2 years back, and then they were able to take over the center of Farah province, albeit for a few hours, but they did take over the city center.
Shafiq, you alluded to how complicated the terrain in Afghanistan is a few moments ago. Look, let me ask you this. I mean, how much do local tribal dynamics play into the government's struggles in Afghanistan to hold on to territory?
Actually, that's a good question, because other than the dynamic of the local tribes as well as elders, there's also other than ethnic divisions. Unfortunately, especially right now, Pakistan, Iran, and some other elements, they would like to create more fictions within the culture and religious society between Sunni and Shias. And this perfectly or sadly applies in Ghazni, because majority people in Ghazni are Sunni and Pashtun, and then you have minority Shia and non-Pashtun Tajik. So you will see the support of Iranian to the Shia sector, as well as support of Pakistan to the Sunni side. So we have also heard that in other areas, including the northern Afghanistan, there are some Russian support to the local fighters as well as influential power brokers there. They supply arms, they provide money, and even training. And recently, the people who came to Ghazni, it's massive number of people. It's around 1,000 people. It's not only Taliban. And they have received training, because the type of attack they carried, it's unprecedented. It's very complex. They cut the supply route to south and capital of Afghanistan. They cut the power. They cut the communication lines like cell phones, everything else, and they burned down brutally the city. So it was unprecedented, I would say, attack in the last 17 years. So this shows that, of course, besides some power brokers inside the Taliban, there is strong advisors, especially from Al-Qaeda affiliates, which called Al-Qaeda Indian subcontinents. They help, and they're here to advise them and to support them. And we have also, so far we don't have the name in list, but we have heard that there are some senior Al-Qaeda members from Indian subcontinent who was part of the operations or attacks, and they have died as well.
Ahmad, analysts have suggested that the assaults on Ghazni are essentially a show of force by the Taliban before getting into peace talks or negotiations with the U.S. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that is, of course, part of their strategy, because they're showing to the United States that the Trump administration's strategy of weakening them militarily has not worked out. So if there are any negotiations between the United States and the Taliban about the potential withdrawal of U.S. troops or about any political settlement in Afghanistan, then it would be the Taliban which would sit on the table from the position of strength, not the American side or even the Afghan government. Let's remember that the Taliban has so far not accepted to sit down with the Afghan government. They've only agreed to negotiate with the United States. So it is premature to even talk about the prospect of any political settlement between the warring sides. But at this moment, both sides want to increase their leverage on the battlefield in order to use that as for any potential negotiations.
Mushtaq, from your vantage point, what kind of conditions would the Taliban accept in any kind of a peace negotiation or peace deal? I mean, would they want a power-sharing deal? What would they want?
Well, they will certainly start from the point of returning back to the throne that they were toppled down from in 2001 by the international forces. But that is where they will start the negotiation. But of course, they are looking for a power sharing at this moment of time. And that will be where they will start negotiating. But the problem with the Taliban, till the negotiation really matures, it matures enough to the level of making it public, they will continue fighting and they will continue showing, they will demonstrate the power on the conflict scene. So basically what they will be pushing for is power sharing, and that is something that will be acceptable to all sides, given that they agree to some of the non-negotiable terms from the international community and from the Afghan government.
Ahmad, what do you think? Would the Afghan government, would the U.S. government be amenable to some sort of power-sharing deal?
The Afghan government and also Washington, they have indicated that they will accept the participation of the Taliban in the political system in Afghanistan. But I would slightly disagree with Mr. Hamdam in that the Taliban leaders want a power-sharing deal. So far, the message from the Taliban leadership has been consistent that they want the reestablishment of the Islamic Emirate. They do not recognize the legitimacy of the current political system in Afghanistan. And that is the reason that they have only accepted to talk to the Americans, but not to the Afghan government. Certainly, there are leaders within the Taliban that they would be amenable to any power-sharing agreement, but the hardliners and the ideological core of the Taliban, they reject the current political system as un-Islamic, and they want the reestablishment of the Islamic Republic in the country.
Mushtaq, Ahmad just disagreed with one of your points. Did you want to reply to anything he said?
Well, this is what I'm saying. Whenever you enter negotiation process or you sit on the negotiation table, you start from your highest demands and you put forth your best demand, just like the Hizb Islami did during their peace negotiation with the Afghan government. But the ultimate thing is that even Taliban have realized that it's no more Afghanistan of 90s. Afghanistan has changed, and even Taliban have changed. And of course, there are hardliners. And I want to highlight one point, that the Ghazni attack was basically something planned and undertaken by those hardliners, because Taliban can be classified into three groups as far as decision making is concerned. The hardliners, the ones who believe in battlefield success, there is a group who believe in negotiation, and there is a group which is undecided as of yet. And the people who believe in fighting it out and facing it off with the international community and the Afghan government, they were not even happy with the truce last time that happened during the Eid al-Fitr. And they will always try to really dictate the terms by making some sensitive and sophisticated attacks, so that the consensus that has been built around the peace process is washed away, is taken away from the system. And also they will try to dictate the terms in terms of decision making. But the reality is that when they go to the negotiation table, even if they're talking to Americans, on what terms? Americans have, and not only Americans, but the whole international community has invested in Afghanistan for 17 years now, and nobody will agree to giving up on all of those achievements that have been made over the course of last nearly 2 decades. So yes, they will start from the hard position, but definitely they will negotiate down to power sharing. That's my view.
Shafiq, just how concerned must the government of Afghanistan be right now?
I think it is absolutely concerning, and the government is concerning in preparing to respond not only to the incident of Ghazni, but meanwhile there are some threats in some areas like eastern Afghanistan. So the government is well prepared, but meanwhile there's one big hope, not only for the government but for the entire Afghan population, and that is peace and reconciliation. So I think it is the last shot, especially the big Eid negotiations and ceasefire, and I hope that this will settle through a peace deal. Otherwise, I don't think if there will be any winner, for this warfare. And this is realized by the Afghan government as well as the international allies. And the new strategy for Afghanistan by the United States is conditional based. So the United States will stay as long as Afghan people need their support and as long as they are needed in Afghanistan. So this is also realized by Taliban that the United States and the NATO will not leave Afghanistan until the Afghan people ask them. So perfectly, I think this is a time for the Afghan people and for the Taliban to come to a negotiation table and to make a settlement and end this war. And in that case, everybody will be the winner and nobody will be the loser.
Mushtaq, you just heard Shafiq talk about the effects on the population. Look, I want to ask specifically about the humanitarian cost of what's going on. I mean, I've read reports in the past few days that it was so dangerous in Ghazni that even dead bodies in the streets couldn't be moved for days. So what kind of a toll is this taking on the local population, on ordinary Afghan citizens?
Absolutely. Psychologically, it has been devastating. Let me share another piece of information that the Taliban have shown a dissent or a sense of unhappiness with the Red Cross, believing that they did not treat well the dead bodies belonging to them. Yesterday, there was a photo shared on the social media where coffins were being, empty coffins were being carried to Ghazni center by the vehicle of Ministry of Interior. That has created a lot of uproar among the general public. So it's psychologically devastating, and I think this is the Taliban tactic where they really want to impact the psychologies of the Afghans, try to break the consensus that is built around the peace process, because general public over the course of between January 2018 and April 2018, the general public really supported President Ghani in his quest for peace process. There was one voice from the nation that they wanted peace process. They supported the Kabul process announcement as well. But now looking at the social media and the views that are being poured in by the general public, you can see that the Taliban are succeeding in impacting the psychologies, impacting the viewpoints, the thought process in terms of supporting the peace process. So not good signs for the Afghan nation and Afghan government, and of course for the potential peace process that was in a stage where a lot of hope was created.
Ahmad, is the current government up to the task of keeping the country together? And perhaps more importantly, does the U.S. believe, does NATO believe that the current government in Afghanistan is up to the task of keeping the country together?
The Afghan security forces have definitely made remarkable progress over the past years, but we see that they still rely on the coalition forces when it comes to support roles like air power, logistic, and others. And without the support of coalition forces, they have been struggling to maintain their hold over population centers in different parts of the country. So right now, the Trump administration's strategy is to continue to train, advise, and assist the Afghan security forces so they would become able to police Afghanistan's border and fight against the Taliban with minimal foreign assistance. Let's remember that the withdrawal of U.S. troops in the latest years of the Obama administration happened in a very abrupt way. So that created a vacuum for the Taliban and other insurgent and terrorist groups to fill the vacuum. So I think that the Trump administration has learned from that mistake and also the mistake that the U.S. did in Iraq. However, it has become increasingly difficult also for the administration here because it is now close to the first year anniversary of the Trump's South Asia strategy, and it has little to show as progress there in Afghanistan. And on the other hand, the war is becoming increasingly unpopular here in the United States, so President Trump may need some results to keep its commitment to Afghanistan. And we talked about the reconciliation issue at a time that the Taliban is increasing its violence and the government is delivering unilateral concessions. That would also deepen divisions within the Afghan government about the reconciliation process. Mm-hmm. So that is also part of this Taliban strategy to sow divisions within the Afghan government.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. We have run out of time. Thank you to all our guests, Shafiq Hamdam, Ahmad Majidyar, and Mushtaq Rahim. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the entire team here. Bye for now.